Session. The moment everyone notices you, what makes some people command a room, there is a moment in every gathering, every meeting, every crowded space, when a single presence reshapes the room. Conversations falter, attention shifts, energy bends, not because someone has raised their voice or claimed authority, but because of them. It starts imperceptibly. A subtle adjustment in posture, a gaze that lingers just long enough to be felt. A calm, measured step across the floor, and suddenly the room reorganizes itself around a center you barely recognize. People lean slightly toward them. Others pause mid-sentence. Even those who were speaking find their words diminishing in weight. Something has changed, and it is not the room. It is the perception of power. What makes this possible? Most assume charisma, confidence, or sheer force of personality, but those are surface traits, ephemeral and often performative. Loudness, titles, or the trappings of formal authority may get attention, but they rarely earn instinctive compliance or subtle deference. The truly commanding presence operates on a different level, one that is invisible yet tangible. The secret lies in perception management, emotional control, and the mastery of subtle cues. The people who dominate a room do not demand notice. They invite it without appearing to try. They are calm, deliberate, and unconcerned with being liked. Their influence is like gravity, unspoken, inevitable, unavoidable. Machiavelli observed this centuries ago. In his time, rulers, generals, and courtiers understood that power was not simply held, it was perceived. A prince did not need to shout to command his advisors. A general did not need to wave a sword to ensure loyalty. Influence came from the ability to occupy space psychologically before ever issuing an order. Those who mastered presence could bend actions, attention, and thought without overt coercion. Modern examples mirror the same principle. In a crowded boardroom, the quiet executive draws everyone's attention with a single glance. In social gatherings, the one who stands slightly apart, listening more than speaking, becomes the magnetic point of focus. The room, whether consciously or unconsciously, acknowledges them as the reference point, and energy flows accordingly. Commanding a room is not about dominance. It is about control without confrontation. It is about being emotionally unreadable, socially unflappable, and deliberately present. You do not fill a room with noise. You fill it with attention, and attention is power. The first step is understanding that people respond more to the signals you give than to your words. Posture, gaze, timing, and calm decisiveness all create a subtle hierarchy. The less reactive you are to the chaos around you, the more the chaos rearranges itself around you. Silence, steadiness, and awareness become your instruments. By the end of this journey, the principles Machiavelli observed in Renaissance courts will reveal themselves in everyday spaces. You will see how to occupy a room without demanding it, how to wield influence without overt aggression, how to shift energy, command focus, and cultivate presence that feels natural, effortless, and quietly irresistible. Because to control a room, you do not need to force it. You need only to be the gravitational center around which it turns. The illusion of power and authority. Why most people fail to influence: walking into a room, speaking your mind, displaying titles or credentials. These are often mistaken for authority. Yet, time and again, those who flaunt power loudly are the ones who vanish into the background. Why? Because dominance without strategy is empty. It is visible effort without substance, noise without control. Most people fail to influence not because they lack intelligence, skill, or even knowledge, but because they misunderstand the nature of authority. They overexplain, desperately clarifying their position. They seek approval, scanning faces for affirmation before daring a move. They react emotionally to challenges, broadcasting insecurity like a flare for predators. Every action intended to assert control, ironically, signals vulnerability. Observers read these cues instinctively. Someone who defends themselves is always weaker than the one who holds silence. Someone who overcompensates is always less stable than someone calm. History provides stark lessons. Political advisors in Renaissance courts learned early that those who loudly asserted authority were quickly removed or undermined. Generals who demanded loyalty with speeches and proclamations often found their armies swayed by subtler, quieter commanders. Courtiers who showcased knowledge through incessant chatter were outmaneuvered by the unreadable few who mastered timing, restraint, and perception. Machiavelli observed this relentlessly visible effort to dominate rarely convinces, it exposes. Influence is earned in shadows, not on display. Psychology confirms this pattern. Humans respond not solely to competence but to perceived confidence and status. Mirroring, social signaling, and non-verbal cues communicate far more than words. A calm voice, measured gestures, and deliberate posture convey control. Emotional reactivity, even in self-defense, immediately lowers your perceived authority. People instinctively defer to the center of composure, not to the most vocal participant. The modern implications are profound. In offices, teams, and social spaces, those who seek validation or explain themselves incessantly become predictable. They are readable. Their energy is exhaustible. Their influence is borrowed from the approval of others, rather than cultivated internally. In contrast, those who understand the invisible architecture of perception move effortlessly. They occupy rooms not with force, but with gravitational presence. This section emphasizes that power is rarely what it seems. It is rarely earned through visibility, volume, or credentials alone. It is subtle. It is deliberate. It is strategic. Those who appear untouchable do not draw attention to their methods. They control the environment before anyone realizes they are doing so. By understanding these traps, the over-explaining, the approval-seeking, the reactive tendencies, the audience begins to see social influence as a psychological game. It is a game where perception matters more than intention, silence more than argument, and calm more than aggression. Authority is a signal, not a proclamation. Influence is a rhythm, not a declaration. And those who fail to grasp this remain invisible, while the few who master it command effortlessly. The stage is now set. To control a room, one must first abandon the illusion that effort equals power. The next sections will reveal the mechanisms of subtle dominance, teaching how to transform from reactive participants into strategic centers of influence, much like the advisors and courtiers Machiavelli studied so long ago. SCOR, the Machiavellian mindset, thinking like the invisible authority. Some people enter a room and nothing seems to move, yet everything shifts. It is subtle, almost impatience pivot. Eyes flicker toward them. Energy bends around their presence. This is not charisma. This is the Machiavellian mindset, understanding that perception outweighs reality. Control is never about being right. It is about being seen as composed, decisive, and unshakable. History offers countless lessons. Generals who remained silent in councils, letting others argue and strategize, often won more than those who broadcasted their plans. Rulers who avoided endless explanations preserved mystique and power. Machiavelli observed a brutal truth: people do not respect authority merely because it exists. They respect the individual who controls their environment, who bends circumstance subtly to their favor, and whose calm suggests inevitability. A whisper of intent can be more commanding than the loudest proclamation. Consider the Renaissance courts. Courtiers often overspoke, eager to showcase loyalty or insight. Yet it was the quiet, calculating few who survived betrayals, intrigue, and sudden shifts in power. They acted without announcing their moves. Their gestures, not their words, dictated attention. They were invisible architects of influence, orchestrating outcomes while leaving observers unaware of their hand. The lesson: perception is manipulated more effectively through restraint than through performance. Modern life mirrors these dynamics. In meetings, social gatherings, or leadership situations, those who dominate are not always the loudest or most informed. They are emotionally neutral, unflappable, and unbothered by judgment. They create alignment without demanding it, bending social energy with subtle cues, measured tone, deliberate posture, minimal disclosure. They never overshare, never overperform, and never justify. In essence, they are untouchable because they refuse to participate in the rigged game of validation. The Machiavellian mindset begins internally. Emotional neutrality is cultivated before external command. A disciplined mind free from impulsive reactions signals stability. Strategic restraint communicates control. Silence becomes a tool, not a limitation. Decisions are weighed against the long game of influence, rather than immediate approval. The mentally untouchable do not wait for permission from circumstances, nor do they rush to prove themselves. They exist above the need for consent. This mindset also relies on the understanding of optics. Others' perceptions are as important as reality itself. A subtle glance, a calm acknowledgement, a measured silence all convey authority without words. A leader who debates every point, who constantly defends their position, unwittingly signals fragility. Conversely, the one who allows assumptions to fill the void directs interpretation without speaking. They manipulate outcomes by letting others reveal themselves first. The psychological power of this approach is understated but devastating. Those around the untouchable adjust instinctively, aligning their actions, conversations, and energy to match the unspoken standard. Control is exerted without confrontation, without threat, without spectacle. In essence, the Machiavellian mindscape operates like gravity, invisible yet undeniable, shaping behavior through perception alone. Yet, this mastery is rare because it contradicts social conditioning. Society rewards those who perform loyalty, broadcast competence, and seek approval. It punishes silence and discourages strategic patience. The untouchable, therefore, operate against instinct. They achieve influence not by submission to external validation, but by cultivating internal authority. They are unreadable by design, leaving manipulators disoriented and the reactive exposed. The Machiavellian lesson is simple in principle, but profound in effect. To control a room, begin by controlling yourself, master emotional discipline, refuse to justify, explain, or overperform. Let perception align with your strategic intent, rather than your insecurities. Influence is not a function of volume. It is the art of making others unconsciously follow the flow you design. By the end of this section, the audience sees the paradox. The most commanding presence is invisible, untold, and understated. Control is subtle, silent, and psychologically calibrated. Those who attempt to dominate through words, force, or performance are easily read, easily manipulated, and ultimately easily ignored. Those who think like Machiavelli, however, bend reality to their favor without ever announcing their hand, commanding not by permission, but by the quiet authority of inevitability. SCTOLAV. The psychology of command. Why humans follow without knowing. Some people walk into a room and instantly, without a word, the atmosphere bends around them. Others speak loudly, gesticulate wildly, and yet their presence is ignored. Why? The answer lies not in volume, force, or intellect, but in perception. Human beings, more than they admit, are wired to follow cues of authority, certainty, and emotional stability. The most commanding figures never demand attention. They signal it through subtleties that bypass conscious reasoning. Consider a room full of murmuring courtiers in a Renaissance palace. Some argue, some plead, some flaunt their titles and accomplishments. And then one figure simply enters calm, composed, unmoved by the chatter. Conversations pause. Eyes unconsciously find this person. Decisions begin to pivot without instruction. Machiavelli understood this invisible phenomenon. Power is less about what you say and more about how you exist in the social field. Emotional invulnerability communicates authority more reliably than words ever could. Psychologists today call this perceived invulnerability. A person who is grounded, detached, and non-reactive creates a gravitational field of influence. Others instinctively defer, not from fear, but because the social brain recognizes predictability in uncertainty. Someone who remains calm under pressure becomes a reference point. They are the axis around which social energy naturally rotates. Their emotional neutrality is not apathy. It is strategic stability. When you are unflappable, you become socially legible. Your intentions are clear, but your vulnerabilities remain hidden. The smallest gestures carry enormous weight. A slow, deliberate step can command space. A gaze that lingers just long enough to register but not enough to be read signals dominance. Even posture communicates hierarchy. Open, relaxed, and unhurried positions are perceived as confident. Fidgeting and rushing reveal submission. Tone matters too. Measured speech conveys certainty. Excessive explanation communicates doubt. Explaining yourself, defending a position repeatedly, or over-engaging erodes authority. Each word you expend to convince is a crack through which observers measure your insecurity. History is littered with examples. Generals who calmly surveyed battlefields while chaos unfolded, rulers who listened more than they spoke, philosophers whose measured responses shaped councils. These individuals were followed not because they demanded it, but because they were psychologically untouchable. Modern boardrooms mirror the same principle. The executive who responds with composure during conflict, the speaker who listens before asserting a point, the leader who radiates certainty without ostentation. These are the ones who steer decisions quietly, invisibly, but powerfully. Machiavelli's insight remains chillingly relevant. Humans follow cues, not commands. People obey authority that feels inevitable, decisions that appear calculated, and leaders who remain unmoved by circumstance. This is why the untouchable are rarely loud. They do not coerce, they absorb. Their consistency fosters trust, their silence fosters curiosity. The social mind projects stability onto them, even if the observer never fully understands why. There is also a paradoxical truth. The less you try to assert dominance consciously, the more influence you hold. Overcompensation, over-explaining, interrupting, performing confidence signals desperation. The human brain unconsciously detects neediness as weakness. Conversely, strategic restraint creates the illusion of natural command. The untouchable occupy a social space like gravity occupies space, felt by all, challenged by none. This psychological architecture extends beyond individual interactions. Social gatherings, political assemblies, and professional hierarchies all function on this principle. Those who are readable are manipulable, those who are unreadable are followed. Silence, measured responses, controlled gestures, and deliberate pacing generate authority in ways the mind obeys before logic has a chance to intervene. The room does not submit because of coercion. It defers because of invisible order. The section closes with a sobering realization: power is never granted. It is absorbed by those who refuse to expose weakness, those who refuse to over-explain, those who refuse to let circumstance dictate their emotional state. Influence is internal first, anchored in calm detachment and perceptual mastery, and external second, radiating outward to shape the behavior of everyone in the room. Machiavelli's uncomfortable truth emerges: to control every room, to be followed without overt authority, is to master the invisible currents of perception. It is to understand that humans follow not the loudest voice, but the presence that signals inevitability. And those who can cultivate this unseen gravity, this psychological command, become untouchable, unshakable, and uncontested. Sexfion v. Modern room control strategies, turning historical insight into action. Today, the corridors of power have changed, but human nature has not. Centuries separate the courts of Florence from the boardrooms of New York, the grand halls of Versailles from digital Zoom rooms. And yet the same invisible rules apply. People unconsciously respond to presence, composure, and controlled perception. Understanding how to move through these spaces, how to occupy them without demanding permission, is the modern extension of a principle Machiavelli observed long ago. In any setting, a conference room, a networking event, a virtual meeting, the dynamics of attention and influence are strikingly consistent. Those who dominate are not always the loudest or most informed. They are the ones whose presence is steady, whose speech is measured, whose focus signals intent. They do not rush to fill silence. They let the room adjust to them. They reveal information strategically, never over-explaining, never over-performing. Each word, each gesture, each pause is calibrated to maintain control over perception. Consider a contemporary office scenario. A heated debate erupts over strategy. The loudest voices clamor for agreement or validation, and then one individual speaks, calmly, deliberately, not to convince, but to observe and redirect. Their voice does not shout authority, it conveys inevitability. The room leans toward them not because they have the most facts, but because they project equilibrium. In a modern video call, this same principle translates into camera presence, posture, tone, and timing. Even without physical space, attention can be captured and held. Presence is a broadcast, silence is a signal, and restraint is power. Social media amplifies the principle further. Influencers, content creators, and thought leaders who cultivate mystery, avoid over-explanation, and maintain selective transparency often command larger audiences than those who seek approval through constant justification. The digital arena rewards those who are unreadable and punishes those who reveal too much. Overperformance, emotional reaction, and compulsive defense erode authority in every sphere, virtual or physical. The psychologically untouchable navigate both spaces with subtlety, preserving their influence while others exhaust themselves trying to convince the crowd. Historical analogies underscore the point. Renaissance courtiers who survived intrigue were not necessarily the most learned, they were the most calculated. Military commanders who inspired troops did not yell instructions, they maintained calm, commanded presence, and revealed strategy only when necessary. Today, the same principle applies to modern professionals, politicians, and leaders. Influence is cultivated quietly through selective action and strategic restraint. Attempting to dominate by volume or overexposure is the modern equivalent of stepping into a trap. Those who overperform signal vulnerability. Those who resist performative temptations signal control. The documentary emphasizes practical strategies: remain calm when provoked, speak only when clarity or impact demands it, and avoid explaining for the sake of approval. Observe first, respond second. Make others reveal their positions while you control your own. Control attention through presence, posture, and focus rather than through assertion. In social gatherings, allow pauses to linger, let silence do the work of influence. In presentations, slow pacing communicates certainty. Measured eye contact signals dominance without aggression. The same principle holds in online interactions. Post selectively, engage selectively, and let absence amplify authority. Ultimately, the modern room is a stage where perception is the currency of influence. The cues are timeless poise, clarity, emotional neutrality, and controlled attention. Those who master them are followed without demand, deferred to without coercion. Machiavelli's insight remains undiminished. The most potent form of control is invisible, subtle, and internal. By internalizing restraint and cultivating strategic presence, individuals can shape environments, influence outcomes, and command attention, not through force, but through the quiet authority that compels others to align unconsciously. Control is not about being liked, understood, or agreed with. It is about being perceptible in a way that makes others adjust to your rhythm, your focus, your emotional steadiness. Over centuries, the instruments have changed, palaces to boardrooms, rallies to social media, but human behavior has remained remarkably consistent. Modern room control strategies are simply Machiavelli translated into today's language: presence over performance, restraint over reaction, clarity over over-explanation. And for those who master it, influence becomes effortless, nearly invisible, and profoundly durable. SIOV. The power of strategic silence, speaking less, influencing more. The loudest person in the room rarely commands it. In fact, volume often signals vulnerability. Over-talking, over-explaining, and over-justifying are unconscious invitations for others to occupy your space, to probe, challenge, and ultimately control the narrative. In contrast, those who speak less, who measure their words, who allow silence to linger, gain a subtle yet devastating authority. Silence becomes their instrument, not their absence. The documentary opens with cinematic imagery, a dimly lit negotiation room. Tension hangs in the air, voices clash, and then one figure leans back, calm, unhurried. They speak only once, yet the room shifts. Each participant recalibrates. The silent authority dictates the pace, the focus, the flow. Historical rulers operated the same way. In Renaissance courts, a pause could redirect alliances. In battle councils, a measured silence made generals' intentions unknowable and fearlessly influential. Machiavelli noted this instinctively. The visible need for explanation signals weakness, the unreadable presence signals dominance. Modern examples echo the same principle. A CEO in a boardroom lets colleagues debate endlessly before weighing in with a single, decisive observation. Negotiators strategically pause, forcing counterparts to reveal their positions. Thought leaders on stage or in interviews answer with brevity, creating curiosity, command, and anticipation. Silence compels others to act first, to expose themselves, to fill in the gaps left intentionally. The less you say, the more control you maintain over the narrative. The psychology behind this is precise. Humans instinctively seek closure, understanding, and reassurance. When the expected response is withheld, anxiety rises. Conversations, decisions, and judgments shift toward the silent party. Silence does not equate to passivity, it is deliberate, disciplined, and calculated. By refusing to over-explain, you occupy a psychological high ground. Others react to you. They reveal themselves. You remain untouchable. The documentary emphasizes subtle, cinematic cues: a slow gaze, a measured pause, a posture of calm attention. Each is amplified by the absence of unnecessary speech. Every word spoken unnecessarily is energy spent relinquishing influence. Every word withheld is influence retained. Historical accounts of political tacticians, military strategists, and influential thinkers repeatedly demonstrate the same effect. Power does not always reside in speech. It resides in the control of speech. Silence also functions as a mirror. It forces others to confront themselves, to project, to reveal motives and weaknesses. In conversations, meetings, or social gatherings, the silent observer becomes the axis around which the room turns. And yet, strategic silence is dangerous if misunderstood. It must be paired with presence, confidence. Silence without awareness appears evasive. Silence with awareness appears commanding. One is weak. The other is untouchable. The documentary concludes this section with a haunting, cinematic reflection. Control is not about saying more. Control is about leaving space, shaping perception through what is unsaid, and occupying a room without demanding it. Those who understand this principle navigate life's arenas with a quiet certainty. Their power is invisible, yet unmistakable. In the theater of human interaction, the most dangerous moves are often the ones never voiced. Secretiothi, the cost and responsibility of influence, why control must be exercised with awareness. Power is intoxicating, presence is magnetic, influence is seductive, and yet every unexamined advantage carries a weight invisible to the untrained eye. To command a room is to occupy space psychologically, not just physically. It is to bend attention, shape perception, and orchestrate the flow of interaction. But with this power comes responsibility, a truth often ignored in the rush to master influence. The documentary begins with cinematic tension, a dimly lit ballroom filled with murmuring guests. Eyes shift, conversations pause. One person moves subtly, and instantly the room responds. But the narration warns, with every subtle move, every carefully timed pause, every measured word, comes potential for harm. Influence can inspire or it can manipulate, it can guide or it can coerce. History is full of figures who mastered presence but misused it, rulers who sowed fear instead of respect, advisors whose control alienated allies, modern leaders whose charisma became coercion. Machiavelli understood that power without awareness corrodes not only others, but the wielder. The documentary examines the delicate boundary between strategic authority and manipulation. Commanding a room is not domination for its own sake. It is the psychological art of presence. Those who master it understand the ethical implications of influence, what is said, what is withheld, and what is suggested. Every pause and every glance carries intention. The untouchable communicator exercises restraint, knowing that overreach erodes trust. Influence without conscience breeds isolation. Unchecked authority provokes resistance. We explore modern parallels: executives who steer meetings with quiet certainty, politicians who command attention with strategic silence, thought leaders who shape discourse without overperforming. Each example illustrates the dual-edged nature of presence. The more subtle the control, the more powerful, and the more dangerous if unexamined. True authority is rooted in self-awareness, empathy, and foresight. A person who controls a room but neglects responsibility may achieve temporary dominance, but at a cost: fractured relationships, loss of credibility, and emotional fatigue. The documentary introduces a psychological lens. Influence is not merely external, it is internal. Those who wish to command a space must first master their own reactions, biases, and impulses. Emotional discipline ensures that control does not become reactionary or compulsive. Strategic restraint transforms raw power into sustainable authority. The viewer is encouraged to reflect. Commanding a room is not about impressing others. It is about shaping outcomes without sacrificing integrity. Cinematic vignettes illustrate this principle. A negotiator waits silently as tempers flare, allowing opponents to reveal motives. A leader listens more than speaks, calibrating responses to maximize alignment rather than compliance. A public figure exercises careful brevity, letting actions, not explanations, define reputation. Each scenario reinforces the same lesson: influence is most effective when grounded in ethical awareness and conscious intent. The section closes with a resonant reflection: cinematic and almost meditative mastery of presence is a responsibility, not a tool for vanity. Power is not harmless. Influence is not neutral. The untouchable operator navigates every room with an acute awareness of consequence, balancing authority with restraint. Machiavelli's insight resurfaces: control is valuable, but wisdom ensures it does not consume. To command a room is to hold influence lightly, yet deliberately. To act without awareness is to risk the very authority one seeks to preserve. The final thought lingers: the greatest room controllers are not the loudest, nor the most forceful. They are the ones who understand that every gesture, every silence, every word is a choice. And with each choice comes responsibility. Mastery is measured not by submission forced, but by trust earned, influence held without coercion, and power exercised with deliberate consciousness. SCTIONV. The final lesson: you control the room when you control yourself. The room is alive with tension. Conversations hum just below the surface. Laughter flickers like candlelight, and all at once, attention coalesces toward a single figure. Not because they raised their voice, not because they demanded notice, not because they performed. They are simply there, composed, unshakable, silent in ways that speak louder than words. This is the essence of room control, not a theatrical display of power, but the subtle gravity of self-mastery. Throughout this journey, we've explored how historical figures, thinkers, and leaders commanded presence through restraint, perception, and the quiet assertion of authority. Now, the final lesson emerges: you cannot control the room without first controlling yourself. Machiavelli understood this principle long before modern psychology gave it a name. Influence is never granted. It cannot be begged for. It cannot be performed convincingly for long. Influence is absorbed by those who refuse to react on cue, who do not fall into the scripts others write for them. When you remain unshaken by provocation, when you speak selectively and act deliberately, you become the anchor around which the room naturally orients itself. The documentary examines the mechanics of this mastery. Emotional composure is the first pillar. The untouchable individual navigates tension without tremor, allowing others uncertainty, agitation, and expectation to reveal their own positions. Strategic silence is the second pillar. By withholding reaction, by letting the room fill the space with its own projections, one turns attention into a tool rather than a liability. Selective disclosure is the third. Information is revealed only when it advances authority, never in service of vanity or appeasement. Awareness of social psychology is the fourth. Subtle cues, body language, timing, and perception management are leveraged with precision, creating an invisible influence that requires no explanation. We illustrate this with cinematic scenarios. A boardroom where a single poised executive shifts the dynamic without saying a word. A social gathering where the calm presence of one attendee guides conversation and attention. Historical leaders whose restraint, not their armies, determined outcomes. In each scene, control is internal before it is external. The room bends not because of intimidation, nor because of spectacle, but because the person inhabiting it has mastered themselves. Yet, the lesson is not about ego or dominance. It is about responsibility and awareness. Machiavelli warned that unchecked power without discipline corrodes. True room control does not seek to humiliate, manipulate, or coerce. It quietly allows you to navigate influence with clarity and purpose. The observer becomes the center not by force, but by internal equilibrium. As the narrative tightens, the room falls into silence. Every eye turns, every mind anticipates, but the figure does not move unnecessarily. The suspense is deliberate. The message is haunting. Those who control themselves subtly guide the space around them. Their presence is a psychological current impossible to resist, yet entirely unseen. The closing lines linger in the air. If you master your reactions, your words, your timing, your attention, the room begins to respond without your conscious effort. If you refuse to over-explain, over-perform, or over-compete for notice, you occupy a domain of untouchable authority. The power is not in the walls, the audience, or the setting. It resides entirely within you. Machiavelli's echo is clear. Control is not about submission or spectacle. It is about silence that speaks, restraint that commands, and presence that absorbs influence without need. Every room you enter becomes a reflection of your inner mastery. And when you step back, unmoved by expectation, unshaken by challenge, and undistracted by performance, you are untouchable, not because others fear you, but because you have stopped giving them the scripts to manipulate. The final shot lingers, the figure walks away, the room subtly realigns in their absence. Influence has been claimed, not shouted. Authority has been exercised, not forced. Presence has been secured, not demanded. And the audience is left with one truth that resonates far beyond any single room. You control the room when you control yourself.